Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is New York Times bestselling writer Deanna Raybourn. Deanna's latest novel, An Impossible Imposter, is the latest in the Veronica Speedwell mystery series. Deanna, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your latest Veronica Speedwell novel, An Impossible Imposter, how would you describe the novel?
Well, the entire Veronica Speedwell series is pretty much just a Victorian romp. If you like mystery and you don't like a ton of blood and you like, sort of an arch sense of humor, this is the series for you. I have a very intrepid butterfly hunting protagonist by the name of Veronica Speedwell, and she ends up over the course of these books stumbling over dead bodies, as you do. And she has kind of a hunky sidekick who's a natural historian, who she, unfortunately bullies into helping her solve mysteries because he's always in some sort of physical peril, bless his heart.
And do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write the very first Veronica Speedwell novel?
Well, I had already written a Victorian series for another publisher. And when I was making the move over to Penguin Random House and going to be writing for the Berkeley imprint, I didn't really want to leave that time period because there were other things that I wanted to do with it. And I had always been really fascinated by Victorian female explorers. When I got my history degree, we didn't talk a ton about what women were getting up to. And so I just kind of went off on my own and did my own reading. And the great thing about Victorians is that they left a written record of basically everything that they did. And if they were traveling, they wrote letters back home, they kept journals, they gave lectures when they got back off of their voyages. And so there's all this wonderful archival material to go through. And one of the people I was most fascinated by was a female explorer by the name of Margaret Fountain, who was a lepidopterist. She was a butterfly hunter. And that was actually, at a time when it was fairly scandalous for a woman to be earning her own money if she was in any way trying to be genteel. Butterfly hunting was a way that you could have an occupation that was fairly ladylike. You weren't completely beyond the pale socially if you were a butterfly hunter because, you weren't really getting your hands dirty. It's not like they're bloody. It's a fairly tidy occupation, but you could make a really good living doing it. And Margaret did manage to make a good living for herself. She traveled all over the world. She, provided butterflies for collectors all across the globe. And the interesting thing about Margaret is that she had relationships that you don't think of Victorian women as typically having. She had physical relationships that were outside the bounds of marriage. She had interracial relationships, and she wrote about them in the same journals that she wrote about her butterfly collecting. So when you go to read what Margaret was getting up to, she just kind of slyly slips in there, this kind of saucy interlude. At the same time, then she goes on to describe what butterfly she was looking for. And so it makes for really, really fascinating reading. Her journals have kind of been condensed down and published in 2 different volumes. And I just thought she was such an interesting woman because everything you think you know about Victorian women is this really tiny little stereotype that's mostly confined to middle-class women. The really upper-class women, the women who were out there earning a living, the lower-class women were all doing things a little bit different than this, kind of stereotypical picture that we have. And so I thought that would be just a really fun inspiration for a character. So that was the kind of the genesis for Veronica Speedwell. And then, because these are mysteries and you need to have crime, there's usually a dead body lying around somewhere. Sometimes it's a jewel theft, but there can be other puzzles as well. But I do like a good dead body thrown into a book. So usually that's what Veronica's investigating.
So that's great. So I'm curious, have you done a lot of research about that era in terms of butterfly hunting and lepidoptery. I'm not sure how to say that.
You did perfect. It is
Okay.
lepidoptery.
Have you done research about that in preparation for writing these novels?
Oh, yeah. I started researching Victorian female explorers right after I got out of college, which is a very, very long time ago. And so I've slowly just kind of built up this library of natural historians and travelers, and especially the women, what they were getting up to. And when I realized I was going to be focusing on a butterfly hunter, I kind of branched out into Aurelian memoirs. Aurelian is this lovely word that they used to refer to all things butterfly at the beginning of kind of more formal natural history.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I actually experimented with is I raised my own butterflies. You can buy these kits that are made for kids, and they'll send you a chrysalis and a couple of them, and they send you the little habitat. And I made the mistake of raising them in the kitchen because it turns out butterflies really smell bad. So I wasn't super popular with the rest of the family for the time that it took the butterflies to emerge. But I raised painted ladies, and then I set them free outside, and it was this wonderful experience to kind of watch their life cycle. And one of the best compliments I've gotten is from a natural historian who specializes in entomology, who said, "Yeah, you've nailed it. You got it right. The butterfly stuff is all good." And I was like, "Oh, thank
God." That's great. So,
Yeah.
so what was your initial writing journey that led you to writing and getting your first novel published?
I don't ever remember a time when I wasn't storytelling in some way. I mean, I distinctly recall being super excited when I learned how to print, because I could get the stories out of my head and onto my Big Chief tablet, because I was a child of the 70s, and that was the writing tablet that everybody had. And I was just super excited because then I had a medium for telling my stories. And then when I went to college, I double majored in English and history because I figured out that I wanted to write, and I wanted to write historical fiction. And I also got my teaching certificate because I thought, eating would be a nice thing to do while I was waiting to get published. And after that first year of teaching, I kind of sat down, and in 6 weeks, I wrote my first novel, and it was 120,000 words, which is a hideous amount of work in 6 weeks. And the book was not good, but the book had potential. And I sent it in over the transom to a publisher, and I heard back weeks and weeks and weeks later from the editor, giving me every reason he wasn't going to publish this book. But there was one line in his letter, which is, "But I think your writing is absolutely wonderful." And I thought, okay, I'm 23. This is a professional editor who said my writing is wonderful. This is going to happen for me someday. Well, it ended up taking another 14 years to happen. I didn't get a proper book deal for another 14 years. I wrote probably 7 or 8 really bad novels in that period of time. I got an agent, which was kind of a miracle. And she actually gave me a phenomenal piece of advice. I had been kind of all over the map with the types of novels I was trying to write,
Mhm.
and we weren't getting them sold anywhere. And finally, out of this wonderful frustration, she very kindly said, "I think you need to stop writing." She said, "For a year, you need to just not write, because you don't know who you are as a writer yet. All I want you to do is read, because the best way to figure out who you are as a writer is to know who you are as a reader." And then she hung up the phone, and I thought, okay, I'm never going to speak to this woman again, because I figured she was just completely brushing me off. And, I was fairly devastated, but I took her advice. I went off, and for a year, I just read. And I only read things that I loved. And after 12 months, I looked around, and I had this big old stack of books that I'd read. And I realized they all had a mystery structure. They all had a female protagonist. They all had a historical setting. They all had a British sense of, and I went, wait a minute. This is a blueprint. I had a blueprint for the book I needed to write. And it took me another 2 years to write a novel that kind of fit those parameters. But when I was finished, at this point, it's been 3 years since I've talked to my agent. I sent her the manuscript, kind of expecting that she was just going to politely say, "Oh, this was nice, dear." Instead, she picked up the phone a week later and said, "This is it. You did it." She said, "This is the book we're going to sell." And it took her 2 years to place it. But when we did sell it, we sold it in a 3-book deal, and I've been published ever since. So, it was a kind of a long, torturous journey to get there, but I did get there in the end, thank heaven. I kind of did my own terrifying MFA the hard way by writing all of these really bad novels. But I think you learn just as much from the books that are bad as you do the books that are good, maybe more.
Have you wanted to use your home equity to pay off debt or improve your house, but found the old way too painful? There's now a new, better option for accessing your home equity. It's called HomePace. Here's the key. It's not a loan, so there's no monthly payments or interest. Instead, HomePace gives you money up front as an investment in your home. That's right, you get money that you can use however you want without the burden of monthly payments. Then someday when you decide to sell, you share a portion of the gains or losses in your home's value with HomePace. That means if your home's value drops, HomePace takes a loss too. HomePace gives homeowners a better choice to access home equity. No monthly payments, no interest. To get an instant quote, go to homepace.com/quote. It takes less than 5 minutes. That's homepace/quote to get started.
So 14 years, that's a long time. What kept you going and kept you writing for so many years of rejection?
Well, 2 different things. First of all, I'm stubborn as hell. But I am at heart a storyteller, and a storyteller makes up stories whether anybody's listening or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that really kept me going is the fact that I am enormously privileged to have an amazing husband. And, when we had our daughter, I'd been teaching for about 3 years, and I wanted to stay home and write, and he thought that was a great idea. And as every year would go by and I wasn't getting published and I wasn't getting, I wasn't bringing anything in, I would feel so guilty when August would roll around and everybody's going back to school and I don't have a teaching contract. I'm not contributing aside from the fact that I'm making a huge contribution in staying home with our daughter.
Right.
And every year I would say, oh God, am I making mistakes? Should I be working? And every single year that man said to me, you have a job. You're a writer. They just don't know it yet. And so I stuck with it. And every single year we would have this exact conversation. And that's, you really cannot, I think, overestimate how much, it will enhance your career and your life to have a partner who fully believes in you and is able to fully support what you're doing. And, financially it was tight. But, since then we've been I've been successful enough that he has now been able to go and open his own business, because I've been able to kind of take the mantle, off of his shoulders for a little while and let him take risks. So we've kind of tag teamed for each other that way, which has been a really, really lovely thing.
That's great. Well,
yeah, he's good people.
Yeah, it sounds like he's a keeper.
It's been 31 years at this point, Jeff. I've got so much invested in this man.
Well, in terms of fiction, what do you think you were learning along the way as you were writing those novels that didn't end up selling?
I think I learned a lot about my own voice. And I think that was the point my agent was trying to make, is you have to be confident in your own voice, and you have to know who you are as a writer. You have to play to your strengths. There are things that I do very well as a writer, and there are things that I am not as good at as a writer. And it's figuring out what those things are and playing to your strengths that will find you an audience, because whatever you're writing, there's going to be somebody who wants to read that. And it may not be a huge commercial audience. It may be, kind of a small niche audience. And that's fine too, depending on what your goals are. But, for me, it was really kind of zeroing in on what I did well. And then once I kind of got that foundation, it's been much easier then to push and grow and expand those boundaries and learn how to do other things better, because I've got this rootedness and this centeredness in what I know I can do.
So what was your writing process when you were working on An Impossible Imposter? And I'm curious, is it kind of similar for you novel to novel? Are you someone who outlines the novel extensively before you begin writing, or do you have kind of a basic idea and premise and just dive into the narrative? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I look at these people who plot everything out religiously, and I marvel at them, because that is so not my way. I have to, my contracts are structured where I have to submit a synopsis, a proposal for everything I'm going to do. And it's like 3 or 4 pages. And oh my God, how I resent writing this. Like, I literally have to Google how to write a synopsis before I start each one, because I just get so in my own head about it. But I will rough out what the problem is. And, luckily, because I've got, at this point, like, I've lost track. I think it's like 16 or 17 novels that I've got in print. Because I have a track record, and because my editors know that I will finish what I start, I'm allowed a fair bit of leeway. If I can give them a storyline that works, they know there's a good chunk of that that's not going to make it into the book. That was just so I could give them something that they can, kind of hang a hat on and say, all right, we have a starting place. There are always going to be some things that I discover during research or during playing with the characters, or, just kind of that endless what if game that you play with yourself when you're walking the dog or washing the dishes or whatever, and your mind starts to wander. They know that I'm going to go off piste at some point. And they're usually perfectly fine with it. And I will have a general overview of what the book is going to look like. I generally know who the murderer is, although the one I'm writing right now, I've literally completely changed who the murderer was. Right when I started the book, I was like, no, I think I like a different killer. So sometimes I will do that, but and sometimes I find that I'm overthinking it, and I need to strip some things out and simplify a few things. But I have a generally pretty good idea of where it's going to go. Like, I will know A, and I will know D and F and Q and X and Z, but I don't know all the other points in between. And most of those points will stay the same. There's always room for tinkering, but I have a general guideline of where I'm going, but it's definitely not like, perfectly navigated out for me.
Right. Well, you mentioned this novel that you're working on now. Is that another Veronica Speedwell novel?
It is. This is actually Veronica Speedwell number 8 that I'm writing right now. And then I'm literally doing copy edits today on my first contemporary, which is coming out in September.
That's great. Well, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
I think the best writing advice I can possibly give people is to not put too much stock in writing advice, because there's so much bad writing advice out there. The thing is, writing is so idiosyncratic. You've got to figure out what works for you. And if I ever, this is the caveat that I always give when I'm doing like panel discussions and workshops. If there's anything that I say that works for somebody, oh my God, grab it, steal it, use it for yourself. That's fantastic. But if it doesn't click with you, oh my God, that's fine. Then it's just not for you. And that's 100% okay. You're going to find somebody else who will give you a tip or a trick or a hack that works for you. Not everything works for everybody. And, I remember kind of early on picking up 2 different kind of how to write a novel books. And one of them was discussing, how this incredibly successful author is a complete pantser. Like, they never know from day to day what's going to happen in this book. They'll write themselves into big, long, meandering storylines and have to write their way back out again. And then the other book I picked up was by a writer who does 100-page outlines, and just to every little tiny minute point they know before they go in. And I thought, okay, if both of these people are massively successful, New York Times bestselling authors, and they are this far apart, that means there is no one truth. It's your truth, and your truth is great. And whatever that happens to be is just as valid and just as wonderful and just as authentic as anybody else's truth. Whatever gets the words on the page, man.
That's great. Well, what novels have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, I will tell you, I am really looking forward. I haven't actually gotten to read it yet. I'm kind of sitting here with bated breath, waiting for it to drop. And that is Jesse Q. Sutanto's 4 Aunties and a Wedding. It is the follow-up to last year's Dial A for Aunties, which the book was absolutely hilarious. It was a contemporary cozy mystery about this huge Singaporean Indonesian family and what happens when the niece of the family goes on a blind date and her blind date dies. And everybody has to deal with a dead body. So it was absolutely hilarious. I think Netflix was making a series or a film out of it. So I cannot wait for the follow-up on that. I'm super excited. And then I'm about to dive into Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins, who is, kind of an auto-buy must-read for me.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novels?
Well, they can find me at my website, deannaraybourn.com. I am on Instagram sporadically, but I'm on Twitter just about every day. I am in love with the Twitter, so you can usually find me there.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with New York Times bestselling writer Deanna Raybourn. Deanna's latest novel, An Impossible Imposter, is on sale now, so go buy a copy. And Deanna, thanks for doing this interview.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks.